Right, this is now electronics I'm going to talk about, which scares a lot of people, but don't worry, it's not too difficult, the basics. I got this old instrument. It's very unusual and it's got two temperature gauges, so if I'm running a flathead I can have a left temperature sensor and a right with a gauge for each, all in the same gauge if you like. So that's quite handy. So I've loosened it all up, and it's, as these things are, absolute work of art inside. It's basically two little kind of voltmeters there, and then there's all sorts of like a little tuning variable resistor thing there, and others elsewhere. So there's one of those each side. Work of art. And if you look who made it, it actually says the Thomas Edison Inc. And you are. They don't make them like that anymore. So I'm not going to trash this. I'm actually just going to keep the scale. And then I'm going to this is the holder, that's what it comes in. It's a little dash, go into my dash panel. I'm going to actually use two tiny little, they're stepper motors, but they're tiny, they're used in car dashboards. And I've actually done this before, and I control it with a tiny computer which sits inside, which will sit inside the back here. Done it before, not as prettily. This is off one of my unicycles. You might, if you go back through my videos, it's the Mach meter, which is just kind of there for a joke really. Didn't go very fast, but you can see the back is all bodged together. The motor's there, it's the black round thing, and then like glue gun to the top of it is the computer, which you can program through a USB lead, and then just send it data from your sensor and it will put the needle into the correct position. I tend to divide my projects up into outdoor and indoor, so if the weather's really cold or nasty I'll do something indoors. This is one of the indoor ones. I've got some of these old instruments, not quite sure, so 1950s, something like that. This is an unusual one. It's a dual temperature gauge, which means I can have two temperature sensors, one for each side of the engine, because there's actually fittings for them on both sides, where the water comes up emerging from the cylinder head on each side. So what I've done is I've literally taken out the whole innards of this. I won't go into the electronics, but I'll show you the general idea. I've 3D printed a sort of weird structure which will fit into this using this 3D printer. This is a Chinese copy of a MakerBot, and it's old and it's still going, so it works fine for me. I don't know if you can see in there are two black circular things. They are what's called stepper motors, and they're very weak, but they're good enough to move a needle pointer like there around a dial, and so you can use them in sort of analog gauges that are actually really digital. So it looks analog, but it's actually digital. So there's a little computer on the back which I can program with software I've written myself by plugging it into a laptop through the USB cable, and it's also powered by the USB cable. So basically you power it on and it just runs the program forever until you power it off again. So these little pins here, two pins, they connect to my temperature sensors. That's one of them, just for testing. By dunking it in a mug of boiling water, I can get the, about a 97 degree reading. So I've had to do a lot of modification on this. One thing with this was the pointers were wrong, so I managed to find on eBay some of these ex-military pointers, but of course the hole in the middle is too small for them to fit onto the spindle of the gauge. So my bodge for doing that was to buy one of these hand drills. It has a little tiny chuck, and you have all these little tiny drills here. But the cunning thing is, if you unscrew this end, hang on, like that, take it out, you can put the whole of this section into the chuck of a cordless drill, and then drill down into here until you get the diameter you want, and then these have just been pushed on and super glued onto the spindles. I don't know if you can see that one. So it's all super fiddly, but it doesn't cost much money really, it's just time. So I've cleaned all this up with those glasses wipes, computer screen wipes, because this is glass, and yeah, I think it's glass. I just want to make sure it's clean, but I don't want to put anything too strong on it either. So here's my gauge module. So when I power this up, I want to know that it's working. So the way I'm going to do that is, when you apply power, which is just USB, through USB cable from like a phone power bank, it will move, it'll zero itself, then it'll move up to 100 degrees, and then it'll go back, just to show that I know that it's working. And basically each of my instruments is going to just have a USB lead sticking out of it, and they'll all be powered from one of these, which will be probably hidden behind the dash. Okay, so here I've got battery pack, mug of boiling water, one temperature sensor connected to one side. So we will power it up. Hang on. Right, it's ready. So we'll bung this in the boiling water and see what happens. Well, there it goes. Right, that's just not connected to anything. Oh, there we are. So as it warms up, oh, there it goes. There's a bit of an interval between measurements. Of course, it's not boiling water because it's been poured into a cold mug, but what are we reading? Sort of 60-ish. So it might be under reading a bit. Oh, it's still creeping up. Yes, it'll probably creep up to about 70. So what happens if I just unplug everything? I'll just test the other side now. I'll take it out of the water, plug it into the other one. Right, we'll power it up again. There we go, powered up. Zeroing. Okay. Now my sensor is now connected to this one, so it's reading 50. Ignore that, that's because there's no signal on it. It's reading 50. It's not in the water at the moment. Let's bung it back in. There we are. See if it goes up a bit more. Oh yeah. So ultimately I'm going to have to calibrate this against unknown thermometer put into the water, but it's roughly right. It might be slightly under reading by about 10 degrees, I reckon. So for my RPM gauge I've got a choice. I've got this one, which is in a similar style to this one. Also got the Smith's one with a nice mark at 3000 RPM. So I'm going to have to decide which one I decide to use. Just by the way, this is what happens when your printer goes crazy. You get spaghetti. What happened is it didn't stick to the bed, so it just formed a big blob on the end of the extruder nozzle up there. So we try again. Well, this isn't pretty, but you can see how it works. Yeah. Okay, so you can see with a blob of super glue that will work fine. This is one of the little stepper motors. So I'm going to use this pointer from the Smith's gauge in this dial. Right, this is my second attempt. You can see it's doing a bit better this time. So here I've glued the motor in at just the right depth, so that when the dial is on, we glue the dial on, there's just enough sticking out to take this. Then we'll have a spacer ring around the edge, and then the whole lot will get sort of pushed into the enclosure, and because of the spacer ring the pointer won't rub against the glass. Now with this other gauge, it's tempting to just glue the pointer on, but wait, how do I know that my stepper motor isn't zeroed? I need to make sure it's zeroed, so I need to do some of the electronics on the back. This is the little computer that's on the back. It's all on a little tiny board, and they're quite cheap. A mount that's on the back, run a bit of software that zeroes it back to the beginning, start point of its travel, then I'll stick the pointer on pointing at the zero, and not the other way around. Okay, I'm just testing this one now. Power it up. Zeros. That's pretty good. Quite like that. Let's do it again. Zeros. Yep, it's working pretty well. So you see, I've not finished this off yet, but because at the moment I've got no sensor for the RPM, but I'll work that out. That will feed into this little computer, it'll do some maths, and then it'll display it by the position of the needle. Nothing's glued in yet either, I'm just using blue tack. I love blue tack for things like this, because you can change your mind and take it apart again.